A billionaire walks into a quiet funeral and leaves with 3 children he never knew existed. Matthew Walker, a powerful tech mogul from Seattle, built an empire by pushing people away, including his ex-wife Emily. But when Emily dies unexpectedly, Matthew travels to Oregon for her funeral and meets 3 10-year-old triplets standing at her grave. Then, one of them turns to him and says, "She said you were our dad." What follows is a deeply emotional journey that flips Matthew's world upside down. How do you father children you've just met, and what if you were the reason they grew up without you? As secrets unravel and bonds begin to form, Matthew must choose his empire or his children. Don't miss this powerful story of loss, love, and redemption. Subscribe now for more unforgettable stories that touch the heart and stay with you long after the credits roll. The sky over Lake Oswego was the kind of gray that pressed on your chest, a quiet, mournful ceiling. Rain hadn't started yet, but the cold, wet air hinted it was only a matter of time. Matthew Walker stood apart from the small crowd gathered at the cemetery, collar up, hands stuffed deep into his wool coat pockets. The graveside service for Emily Carter, his ex-wife, was short and modest, just as she would have wanted. No grand gestures, no floral arches, no overdrawn eulogies. Just honesty, stillness, and the sound of damp leaves crunching under careful footsteps. He hadn't seen her in nearly a decade, and yet, here he was, late, just like always. He hadn't even known she was sick. There were fewer than 20 people scattered around the gravesite. Some held umbrellas. Some held each other. Matthew held nothing. The priest spoke words Matthew barely heard. His mind had frozen on a single thought. She's gone. Not just gone like a business partner from his past. Gone like a closed door with no knob on his side. Emily had once been his compass, and he'd lost her long before this moment. His breath caught when he noticed 3 children, maybe 10 years old, huddled together near the front. 2 boys and a girl. Their hands clutched white roses. They laid them gently at the foot of the stone before stepping back, the smallest boy wiping his nose with his sleeve. The girl turned, and for one flickering second, her eyes locked onto Matthew's. Brown, deep and familiar. She studied him with unblinking focus, tilting her head as though confirming something in her mind. Then she took a cautious step forward. "She said you were our dad." The words dropped between them like a stone in a still lake. Matthew's chest tightened. His eyes darted between the girl and her brothers. They stood shoulder to shoulder, too quiet, too composed for children their age. One of the boys, curly-haired, pale, looked away quickly, while the other shifted uncomfortably. The girl didn't flinch. "I'm sorry," he managed, stunned. "What?" "She said you were our dad," the girl repeated, slower this time, her voice clear but flat. She wasn't accusing. She wasn't crying. She was just stating a fact. A woman stepped in quickly, late 30s, dark coat, no umbrella. She placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Come here, Sophie." The girl obeyed reluctantly, her gaze never leaving Matthew. The woman turned to him. "I'm Julia, Emily's best friend. I was her roommate in college." She paused, looking down at the trio. "These are Liam, Sophie, and Ben, Emily's children." Matthew's heart skipped. Julia glanced at him with something like sympathy and something else. Caution, maybe. She didn't want them to grow up without knowing the truth. She wanted them to meet you if the time ever came. "What truth?" he asked hoarsely, barely able to form the question. Instead of answering, Julia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is from Emily. She wrote it the week she was admitted to the hospital. She told me to give it to you if—" He took the letter slowly, hands trembling more than he wanted to admit. Her handwriting on the front, Matthew. "It's all in there," Julia said gently. "Her reasons, her regrets, her hope. The children had returned to the grave, arms linked. Sophie was whispering something to her brothers, and they nodded. Then they turned and walked down the gravel path together, small backs growing smaller in the distance. Matthew stood frozen beside Emily's casket, her letter heavy in his hand, a cold wind rising around him. He hadn't just buried an ex-wife. He might have buried a decade he never knew existed. And, somewhere down that path walked 3 pieces of himself, leaving him behind. The cafe near Millennium Plaza Park was quiet, its windows fogged from the chill outside. Matthew sat in a corner booth, Emily's letter unopened on the table before him. His coffee had long gone cold. He hadn't touched it. His fingers lingered on the envelope, tracing the familiar loops of her handwriting. He couldn't bring himself to open it, yet. He stared through the glass at the plaza, where families strolled bundled in jackets, children chasing ducks near the lake. He had children. The thought repeated itself like a heartbeat in his head. Liam, Sophie, Ben. Finally, he broke the seal. Her words, written in blue ink, unfolded slowly, like a final breath. Matthew, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer able to tell you the truth myself. I hate that. I hate that I ran out of time. Yes, they are yours. I never lied about that. I never doubted it, not even once. But I didn't tell you because I was afraid. Not of you, but of what you'd say, of what you'd choose to do with the truth. You were always chasing something bigger, a company, a goal, a legacy. And I was just one of the many things you left behind. But our kids, Matthew, they are the best thing I ever did. I hope one day you'll meet them not as a stranger, but as a man willing to try. They deserve that. They don't need your money, they need your presence, your heart. I know you're capable of it. I saw that part of you once. Maybe you forgot it was there. Maybe I did too. I didn't hide them out of spite. I hid them out of love and fear. Please, be gentle with them. And if you can't be that, just be honest. Emily, by the time he finished reading, his throat burned and his vision blurred. The truth wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was soft, aching, and full of regret. She'd carried this alone, all of it, and he hadn't even known. He folded the letter carefully, as though it were something sacred, and slid it back into the envelope. Then he pressed it to his chest just for a moment, silently asking for forgiveness from a woman no longer here to give it. His phone buzzed on the table, startling him. A message from Julia. The kids are at the Lakeshore Inn, room 204. If you want to say something, come tonight. If not, that's okay too. He stared at the screen, heart pounding. Did he even have the right? Outside, street lamps flickered on, casting long shadows across the park. The air had turned colder, more impatient. Still, he lingered in the booth a little longer, thinking about everything he should have said to Emily, and everything he now needed to say to her children. At 7:32 p.m., Matthew found himself standing outside room 204, his knuckles hovering just above the door. He exhaled slowly and knocked. The door opened to reveal Julia, wearing a soft sweater and tired eyes. Behind her, the kids sat on the carpet, playing a quiet card game. Sophie looked up first, her face unreadable. "You came," Julia said simply, stepping aside. Matthew walked in cautiously, uncertain of where to stand. The room was cozy but crowded. Suitcases half-zipped, coloring books on the dresser, a single-family photo propped by the lamp. I read the letter," he said, voice low. The kids didn't move, didn't smile, but they listened. "I'm not great at this," he admitted, twisting his hands nervously. "I don't know what to say except, I'm sorry, and I'd like to try, if you'll let me." Liam looked at Ben. Sophie raised her chin slightly, assessing him again, measuring the space between who he was and who she hoped he might be. "We're just kids," she said softly. "You're the grown-up. You're supposed to know what to do." Matthew felt that like a blade. Still, he nodded. "You're right, I don't. But maybe we can figure it out together." The silence stretched. Then Ben quietly asked, "Do you like pancakes?" Matthew blinked. "Yeah, I love pancakes." The tension cracked. A beat passed, and Liam whispered, "Okay, but you have to eat the ones Sophie makes, even if they're weird." Sophie punched his arm, but her smile, small and sudden, was the first flicker of hope. And that was enough to start. The next morning, the small kitchen at the Lakeshore Inn smelled faintly of maple syrup and burnt toast. Julia had taken the couch overnight, insisting Matthew sleep in the empty adjoining room, though sleep had barely touched him. He spent most of the night staring at the ceiling fan, trying to picture a life that included kids, not boardrooms. Now, as the triplets sat around a breakfast table cluttered with fruit, jelly packets, and too many forks, Matthew watched from the doorway, awkwardly unsure whether to join them or just observe. "Sit down," Sophie said, not unkindly, but with the same bluntness Emily used to have when telling him to stop checking his email at dinner. "Before the pancakes get cold." Ben slid a plate toward him, 3 lopsided pancakes stacked like wobbly bricks, drowning in syrup, a single strawberry on top. Matthew sat slowly, feeling the weight of 3 curious gazes trying to figure him out. "So, who made these?" "I did," Sophie said proudly, holding up a spatula smeared with batter. "They're a little weird, but I added cinnamon. Cinnamon makes everything better." "They're amazing," Matthew said after the first bite, surprised. "Seriously, you could open a restaurant." Sophie's eyes sparkled just for a second. "Mom used to say that too." That name, Mom, hung in the air for a beat. Ben dropped his fork. Liam, fiddling with a crayon beside his juice glass, finally broke the silence. "She said you were always working, that you were building big stuff, too busy for little stuff." Matthew nodded slowly, his throat tightening. "I was, and that was a mistake I can never undo." Liam glanced up. "Then why are you here now?" "Because I found out," Matthew said gently, placing his fork down. "Because I want to know you. I want to be here now, if you'll let me." Ben stared at him. "Are you rich?" The table went quiet. Julia nearly choked on her coffee. Matthew chuckled, caught off guard. "I guess I am." "Good," Ben said seriously. "Because Liam wants to be an engineer, and Sophie needs a feather museum." "I do not," Sophie said, laughing. "You do too. You have like 30. Feathers are not a museum, Ben." "They could be," Matthew offered, amused. "If they mattered to someone enough." Sophie gave him a sidelong look. "You really think so?" "I do. Anything can matter if you love it." That silenced them in a new way, this time with thought. The triplets returned to eating, a little more relaxed now, a little more open. For a few minutes, the only sounds were forks against plates and the occasional giggle from Ben, who was quietly making pancake faces out of fruit. When breakfast ended, Julia began clearing dishes while Matthew helped Ben tie his shoes. It felt strange, how natural it started to feel. How the air around him didn't hum with deals or deadlines, but with laughter and syrup. As they got ready for the day, Julia pulled Matthew aside. Her voice was low, her eyes serious. "They've handled losing Emily better than I expected," she said softly. "But they're still kids, Matthew. They've been through enough. Please, don't dip in and out of their lives. If you're staying, stay. If you're not, better to go now." Matthew looked back toward the room where the kids were laughing over a knock-knock joke Liam had just messed up. "I don't know how to be a dad," he confessed. "No one does," Julia said, "but the ones who show up, those are the ones who matter." Later that day, they visited Washington Park in Portland. It was a gray afternoon, clouds thick but dry. The kids scattered quickly, chasing one another between trees, pointing at squirrels, laughing freely. Sophie picked a single yellow rose from a bush and walked it back to him. "It's not perfect," she said shyly, "but it's pretty." Matthew crouched to her level, taking the flower carefully. "I think it's perfect," he said honestly, "just like this moment." And for the first time in years, he meant it. That evening, a soft drizzle misted the windows of the Lakeshore Inn. Street lamps flickered to life outside, casting golden halos across the pavement as Julia tucked the kids into bed. Matthew stood by the doorway, unsure if he should stay or slip away. The silence between bedtime chaos and lights out was delicate. He didn't want to intrude. But then he heard Ben's voice call out, small but certain. "Can you read us something? Mom used to... every night." Matthew swallowed the lump rising in his throat. He stepped into the room and glanced at the nightstand, where a worn copy of Charlotte's Web sat under a pair of reading glasses that hadn't been moved in weeks. He picked up the book carefully. "Sure. This one?" 3 small heads nodded in unison, their blankets already pulled to their chins. Julia gave Matthew a grateful smile and quietly stepped out, leaving the door cracked open behind her. Matthew sat on the edge of the bed and opened the first page. His voice was hesitant at first, rusty from years of board meetings and tech summits, not bedtime stories. But as he read, something softened. His tone, his posture, maybe even something in his chest. Sophie leaned against his arm, her breath warm and steady. Liam shifted closer, and Ben curled up with a stuffed bear that was missing one eye, but clearly loved. When the chapter ended, no one asked for another. They didn't need to. It was enough. That night, Matthew returned to his room at the Pearl District condo he'd rented for the week. The city lights twinkled through the window, but he barely noticed. Instead, he stood at the counter with a glass of water, staring at his reflection in the dark glass. A man with everything, yet a stranger to the most important part of himself. The next morning, the kids surprised him with a plan. "We want to go to Powell's," Sophie announced over toast. "It's the biggest bookstore in the world." "It's our favorite," Liam added quickly. "Mom used to take us when she had good days." Ben looked up from his cereal. "It smells like stories." Matthew smiled. "Then let's go." Inside Powell's City of Books, the kids scattered with wonder. The scent of paper and ink wrapped around them like a warm coat. Sophie dashed toward the nature section. Liam disappeared into engineering and building guides. Ben, predictably, gravitated to the dinosaur aisle. Matthew wandered behind them, watching not just what they chose, but how they chose. It carefully, tenderly, like the books were living things. Ben tugged at his sleeve. "I want this one," he said, holding up a slightly tattered paperback with a T-Rex on the front, "but I think I have enough books already." Matthew knelt down beside him. "Buddy, there's no such thing as enough books." He bought the dinosaur book, and Sophie's illustrated bird atlas, and Liam's kit on bridge design. Then he added one more, tucked beneath the other so the kids wouldn't see it, the Single Father's Handbook. On the way back, the kids chatted animatedly in the back seat. Ben named every dinosaur in his new book. Liam explained how bridges use tension and support. Sophie read aloud fun bird facts and giggled every time a name sounded silly. Then, just as Matthew turned onto their street, Ben's voice dipped to a whisper. "Are you going to leave again?" The question punched the air out of Matthew's lungs. He pulled the car to a soft stop and turned around slowly. "Not if I can help it," he said honestly. Liam's gaze was unreadable. "Maybe we can live with you someday." Sophie, never one to let serious moments linger, added, "But only if there's pancakes every Sunday." Matthew laughed, blinking back something sharp in his eyes. "Deal." And, for the first time since Emily's funeral, laughter filled the car like music. It didn't erase the ache of loss, but it reminded them, gently powerfully, that family could still be made, even from broken pieces. Later that afternoon, Julia met Matthew at a quiet corner table in the cafe near Millennium Plaza Park. The sky outside was beginning to dim, overcast with the weight of Pacific Northwest clouds, casting a cool blue hue over the wood-paneled walls. She set a small, leather-bound book on the table between them. "She wanted you to have this," Julia said gently. "It's Emily's journal. She started it after the triplets were born. There's a section, just for you." Matthew stared at the journal as if it might combust in his hands. His fingers hovered over the worn cover, the stitching just barely fraying at the edges. He picked it up with reverent hesitation. "I wasn't ready for any of this," he admitted, voice low, "but I don't think I can walk away now." Julia's gaze softened. "She never stopped believing in you, not once, even when you left, even when she got sick. She always said you had a good heart. You just didn't know how to use it yet." Matthew opened the journal and flipped through the pages filled with the looping cursive, bits of taped-in photographs, grocery lists alongside heartfelt letters. Toward the back, he found it, a page labeled, "If Matthew Ever Comes Back." He read silently, the room fading around him. "Dear Matthew, if you're reading this, it means you came back, and I hope it means you stayed. I never told you because I thought I was protecting everyone. You, the kids, myself. I was wrong to make that choice alone. I hope someday you can forgive me for it. They're good, Matthew. Better than I could have dreamed. Each of them is a reflection of you, your curiosity, your laugh, even your stubborn streak. And if they ever get to know you, really know you, I think they'll see what I saw back then. Someone capable of love, if he'd only let himself feel it." Matthew closed the journal and rested it against his chest. The silence between them was heavy with memory. "I can't undo the years," he said quietly, "but I can try to make the next ones count." Julia nodded slowly. That's all she ever wanted. That evening, Matthew picked up the kids from their walk with Julia along the Willamette River. The wind was sharp but playful, tugging at Sophie's curls and chasing Liam's paper plane as it fluttered down the path. Ben clutched a rock he'd found, a rough, heart-shaped one he called Lucky. They piled into the car, quieter than usual. Maybe they sensed the shift. At the condo, Matthew surprised them with grilled cheese and tomato soup. He burned the edges a little, but none of them complained. He sat with them at the small kitchen table, watching their faces light up as they talked about their favorite colors and what animals they'd be if they could pick. "Fox," Sophie said instantly. "Smart and quick." "Elephant," Liam countered. "They never forget anything." Ben bit his lip. "Can I be a penguin? They stay together, like a family." The room fell still for a beat too long. Matthew's heart clenched. "Yeah, buddy," he said warmly. "Penguins are loyal." After dinner, they curled up on the couch under a mismatched set of blankets. Sophie leaned into his side, her head tucked just below his arm. Ben sprawled across a pillow, his feet in Liam's lap. Matthew opened Charlotte's Web again, and the rhythm of his voice settled them. When the last page closed for the night, Sophie whispered, "Mom would have liked this." Matthew didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat had closed around 100 unspoken regrets. But in that quiet room, beneath dim lamplight and the scent of tomato soup lingering in the air, he made a promise. Not out loud, not yet, but silently, fiercely. He would not run. Not this time. The next morning, the kitchen in Matthew's rental condo buzzed with gentle chaos. Pancake batter dripped onto the stove top, syrup stuck to tiny fingers, and giggles echoed like wind chimes in the spring air. Matthew stood at the stove, spatula in hand, eyebrows raised as he tried, unsuccessfully, not to burn another pancake. Ben watched intently from his seat at the counter. "You flipped that one too early," he said seriously, hugging his stuffed panda tighter. "Mom used to say it has to bubble first." Matthew glanced at him with a crooked grin. "Why didn't you tell me that 3 pancakes ago?" Ben shrugged. "You looked confident." Sophie burst into a laugh, nearly spilling her juice. Liam, already on his second pancake, offered a solemn nod. "Ben's right. Mom always waited for bubbles." Matthew paused, quietly moved. "She must have been a great cook." "She was," Sophie said softly, her voice thinner now. "But mostly she was just Mom. She liked when we had slow mornings. She said pancakes were the best food for thinking." "That's a smart tradition," Matthew replied, handing over a warm, golden one that, finally, looked just right. They sat at the table together, syrup pooling and forks clinking. No one said much after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words, a rhythm of shared presence, unspoken healing. After breakfast, Matthew drove them to Washington Park. The skies were overcast, but not threatening. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and early spring bloom. He held the car door open for each child, still unsure if he was allowed to hold their hands, and still hoping, somehow, they'd offer them first. As they walked along the garden path, Sophie veered off, her eyes catching something. She tiptoed to a bush dotted with yellow roses. With care and a child's delicate grace, she picked the smallest one and brought it to him. "It's not perfect," she said, holding it out, "but it's pretty." Matthew took it gently, more reverently than he'd held any billion-dollar contract. "It's beautiful," he said honestly. "Thank you." She smiled shyly and skipped ahead to rejoin her brothers. For a moment, he just stood there, completely still, his heart thudding in ways he didn't know it could anymore. A yellow rose, a small hand, a second chance. Later, in the park's open green space, the kids tossed a football back and forth. Liam tripped over his shoelaces twice, Ben giggled every time the ball bounced, and Sophie ran like she had wings. Matthew didn't play. He watched, absorbed every second, stored it all like a currency he could never spend, only cherish. Eventually, they collapsed into the grass, laughing and breathless. Matthew lowered himself beside them, the cool earth grounding. Ben rolled onto his side, watching the clouds. "Are you going to leave again?" he asked suddenly, so softly that it nearly broke the moment in half. Matthew's heart stumbled. He turned to look at the boy. "Not if I can help it." Liam looked over. "You live really far away, right? In Seattle?" "I do," Matthew replied. "But I've been thinking. Maybe that needs to change." Sophie propped herself up on her elbows. "Like, how? Maybe I get a place here, in Portland, so we can see each other more, if that's something you want." Liam blinked, and his voice cracked just a little. "Maybe we could live with you someday." Sophie added quickly, "But only if there's pancakes." They all laughed. And Matthew, with the grass still cool beneath his back and the sky endless above, felt the smallest thing click into place. Not as a billionaire, not as an ex-husband or a man filled with regret. Just as a dad, one who showed up, finally, and was learning, day by day, how to stay. The late spring sun dipped behind the Portland skyline, casting long golden shadows over the Pearl District. Back at the condo, the day's joy lingered like warm light in the corners of the room. The children had kicked off their shoes, strewn jackets on the armchairs, and sprawled on the living room rug like they had always belonged there. Matthew watched from the kitchen, dish towel slung over one shoulder, uncertain whether to clean or just stay still and savor it. "Do you have any bedtime books?" Sophie asked, clutching her blanket to her chest. I don't think so," Matthew admitted sheepishly, "but I could tell you a story. Or we could go find some together tomorrow." Ben perked up. "Can we go to a real bookstore, with stairs and coffee and everything?" You mean Powell's? Matthew asked with a smile. It's a Portland classic. Liam nodded. Mom used to go there when she needed quiet. She said it smelled like imagination. The memory settled gently into the space between them, tender and grounding. Matthew cleared his throat. Then Powell's it is, tomorrow. But tonight, maybe Charlotte's Web? He pulled his phone out and opened the e-book version. It was my favorite when I was your age. Sophie's eyes lit up. We read that in second grade, but I don't remember all of it. Then it's a good place to start again, Matthew said, moving toward the couch. The kids tucked themselves under a single blanket on the couch. Liam in the middle, Sophie curled to one side, Ben resting his head on a pillow near Matthew's lap. As Matthew read, his voice softened, deepened, grew steadier. He hadn't read aloud in years, not like this, with every word shaped by care and emotion. The room hushed as the story unfolded. You have been my friend, replied Charlotte. That in itself is a tremendous thing. He paused, looking up. The children were quiet, still awake, but drifting. Sophie's hand gripped the hem of her brother's sleeve. Ben was blinking slowly. Liam's head leaned lightly against Matthew's arm. He swallowed hard. Tremendous thing, he repeated quietly, more to himself than anyone else. After the final chapter for the night, he closed the book and glanced at them. Okay, time for sleep. Big day tomorrow. The kids shuffled off to the spare bedroom without protest. But just as he turned off the living room light, Ben's small voice called out from the hallway. Do you tuck people in? Matthew chuckled. I guess I can start. He followed them to the room, pulling the covers up over 3 heads now lying in one tangled heap, all legs and blankets and stuffed animals. Night, Dad, Liam murmured suddenly, barely audible. Matthew's heart stuttered. Good night, Bud, he whispered back, brushing hair from the boy's forehead. Sophie turned to face him. Do you think Mom would be happy? Matthew's voice wavered, but he didn't look away. I think she'd be proud of you, of all of you. Ben, eyes closed, added, She used to say love is the part that never goes away. Matthew nodded, throat tight. She was right. Back in the living room, he sat in the soft light of the floor lamp, scrolling his phone. With quiet resolution, he added something new to his to-do list. Buy 3 books. A dinosaur one, a feather journal, and something with trains. Then, on a whim, he searched and ordered a 4th, the Single Father's Handbook. He set the phone down and walked to the window. The city pulsed with soft light beyond the glass, but here, inside, the world was different. Smaller, quieter, filled with something he hadn't expected to find again, purpose. Tomorrow would bring questions and probably missteps. But for tonight, there was warmth, there was love, and there was the fragile, miraculous beginning of a family. The next morning broke with a light drizzle, the kind Portlanders barely acknowledged. Matthew and the triplets strolled under a shared umbrella, the sidewalk slick beneath their sneakers. Their destination was Powell's City of Books, a promise kept from the night before. Sophie hummed softly as she skipped beside him, her fingers trailing the wet iron railing. Liam held a feather he'd found earlier, examining its curves. Ben clutched his dinosaur figurine like it anchored him. Inside the towering bookstore, warmth greeted them like a friend. The scent of paper, coffee, and rain-damp coats mingled in the air. Matthew guided them up a creaky staircase, letting the kids lead. Each child peeled off in a different direction, Sophie toward nature guides, Liam to transportation, Ben to prehistoric creatures. Matthew wandered after them, watching from a quiet distance. For a man who had once calculated every move with algorithmic precision, this chaos brought a strange, welcome peace. 30 minutes later, they rejoined him near the checkout. Sophie held a tattered second-hand bird guide. Liam found a picture book about classic trains. Ben, of course, had selected a pop-up dinosaur encyclopedia. You each get one. Matthew smiled, taking the books from their hands, then added a fourth title silently, The Single Father's Handbook, sliding it beneath the rest. Back on the rainy sidewalk, the kids walked ahead, bickering playfully about which dinosaur could win in a fight. Matthew smiled as their laughter cut through the gray morning. Then Ben slowed. "Hey, can I ask something?" Matthew nodded, bending down slightly. "Of course." The boy looked up, his voice barely louder than the raindrops. "Are you going to leave again?" Matthew froze. The other two kids stopped too. Liam's hand gripped Sophie's tightly. The question hung in the space between them, heavier than any drizzle. Matthew knelt down so he was eye level with all three. "No," he said softly. "Not if I can help it." Ben's lower lip trembled. Sophie blinked as if measuring the words. Liam tilted his head. "Then maybe we can come live with you someday?" Liam asked, not hopeful or eager, just curious, testing the waters. Matthew didn't answer immediately. He looked at them, really looked. 3 children he hadn't known existed a week ago, now the center of his universe. "I'd like that," he said finally, "but only if it's what you want, all of you." Sophie, ever the realist, added, quickly, "But only if there's pancakes. You can't forget the pancakes." They all laughed, and it broke the tension like sunlight cracking through clouds. As they turned the corner toward their hotel, Matthew slipped a hand into his pocket and rubbed the spine of the parenting book he'd bought. A guide was great, but nothing could prepare him for this. For the vulnerability of being seen, for the terrifying joy of being needed. At the hotel, Julia was waiting in the lobby. She greeted the kids with a warm smile, tousled their hair, and sent them upstairs with a bag of cookies and instructions to not eat them all before dinner. She turned to Matthew. "I have something for you," she said, pulling a manila envelope from her purse. "Emily wanted you to have this, if you stayed." He took it hesitantly, heart racing. "What is it?" "Her journal. Well, one of them. She kept several. This one has entries for the kids, and for you." Matthew nodded slowly, unsure whether to open it now or lock it away forever. "She believed you'd show up eventually," Julia said gently, "but she was scared you wouldn't stay." He didn't speak, but his grip on the envelope tightened. That night, after the kids had fallen asleep tangled on the couch, Matthew sat under a dim lamp with a glass of water and the journal. He opened the first page. "If you're reading this, it means you stayed." The words blurred through his tears. He closed the book softly, overwhelmed, but steady. He had stayed. And tomorrow, he would stay again. By the end of the second week, Matthew knew 2 things for certain. First, Sophie would always choose birds over bedtime. Second, this unpredictable, messy, noisy life with 3 10-year-olds was exactly where he was supposed to be. The shift had been gradual. What began with rented rooms and hesitant visits became something else entirely. School lunches packed in the early morning, socks that never stayed paired, a different dinosaur fact shouted every hour. The rhythm of life was changing, not despite the chaos, but because of it. That afternoon, Matthew waited in the school's drop-off line. The old minivan in front of him idled, coughing smoke into the Portland drizzle. His sleek, black Tesla felt out of place here, but he didn't care. He waved at Ben through the fogged window as the boy ran toward the building, his backpack bouncing behind him like a tail. Back at the condo, he stared at his laptop. His assistant had emailed him again, 3 missed calls from the board, 2 project delays, 1 quiet ultimatum. "Investors are asking questions," the email read. "They're worried about your lack of presence." Matthew sighed, then hit reply. "Let them be worried. I found something more important to invest in." He hit send before he could second-guess it. Later that evening, while the triplets sprawled on the floor coloring, Ben with stegosauruses, Sophie sketching a crow, and Liam drawing a futuristic train, Matthew pulled up a real estate listing on his phone. "Hey, guys," he said carefully, "can I show you something?" 3 heads turned. He turned the phone around. A charming 2-story craftsman just north of Irvington School, with a big fenced yard and tall cedar trees. More space, more stability. "A treehouse," Sophie said immediately, eyes wide. Liam tilted his head. "Is that a porch swing?" Ben didn't say anything, but quietly scooted closer. Matthew added, "It's near your school, and it's got a room for each of you." Sophie blinked. "So, we'd live with you?" "Not instead of Julia," Matthew clarified gently. "She'd still visit all the time, but yes, if you're comfortable, and we take it slow." The kids exchanged glances, those silent, wordless triplet glances, and then nodded in unison. "Can we paint our rooms?" Liam asked hopefully. Matthew chuckled. "Any color you want." It was decided. 2 weeks later, they moved in. The house felt different from the condo, more lived in even on the first night. Julia helped unpack boxes while the kids raced from room to room, claiming corners and windows and closets with wild enthusiasm. That night, after pizza and paper plates on the kitchen floor, Matthew stood in the hallway, watching the kids sleep in their new rooms. Sophie clutched a feather pillow she'd made with Julia's help. Liam had arranged toy trains on his windowsill. Ben's nightlight cast dinosaur shadows across his ceiling. Matthew's chest ached. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was something else, heavier and warmer at the same time. A fierce love he'd never known he could hold. Downstairs, Julia sipped tea in the dining room. "You're doing well," she said softly. "I don't feel like I know what I'm doing at all." She smiled. "That's how you know you're trying." He looked around the house. The sketches taped to the fridge, the mess of shoes by the door, the sound of breathing upstairs, and realized he hadn't once thought about his calendar or market shares, or the Silicon Valley venture he was meant to pitch. He leaned on the doorframe and whispered, This feels like success." And for the first time in years, it truly did. The laughter that once echoed through the craftsman house began to thin when a letter arrived, plain, stamped, and cold. Legal language wrapped around veiled threats. Matthew read it once, then again and again. Julia noticed his silence before the kids did. "What is it?" she asked carefully, eyeing the trembling in his hand. He passed her the letter. Emily's estranged cousin, Mark Carter, had filed a motion in family court. Claiming concern for the children's financial interests, he was petitioning for custody. His argument? Matthew had only recently entered the picture. Mark, according to his lawyer, was a stable, blood relative guardian. He referenced an outdated power of attorney and Emily's name on a trust fund the children hadn't even touched. Julia's face hardened. "Mark hasn't seen those kids since they were babies." "I know," Matthew murmured, "but he's after the trust. And using them to get to it." That night, Matthew sat at the edge of his bed, staring out of the window. He thought of Liam humming train songs in the bathtub, of Sophie carefully tucking a feather under her pillow, of Ben's small hand reaching for his during thunder. He wasn't going to lose them, not now. The next morning, he called his legal team. "I need everything," he said. "Emily's will, medical records, her journal entries. I want Mark's history, his financials, his relationships, every legal thread." Within 48 hours, they had a case file thicker than a phone book, and buried in it, a game changer. The original journal Emily had kept, the one Julia once mentioned but hadn't seen in years. Tucked inside were her private letters to the children, heartfelt, aching entries. Some written during her chemo treatments, others in the quiet hours of late-night fears. And then, a section marked simply, Matthew. If you're reading this, it means you stayed. It means I was right to believe in the man behind the silence, behind the ambition. Please, if there's ever a moment where our children's safety or future is threatened, fight. Not like a businessman, like a father, with love and fire. Matthew felt something crack wide open. He would fight. The courtroom in Multnomah County was stiff and sterile, but Julia sat beside him, her presence warm and grounding. The triplets weren't present by court order. Too much was at stake. Mark sat across the aisle, smug in a tailored suit, flanked by a slick attorney who clearly believed he could outmaneuver a grieving ex-husband and a tech CEO. But they underestimated just how far a father would go. Matthew testified with composure but conviction. He told the story, not the PR version, not the polished one, but the truth, of his failures, his ignorance, his regrets, and, most importantly, of the kids, how they changed him, what they meant to him. His voice trembled only once, when he recalled Ben whispering, "Are you going to leave again?" He paused, then added, "I told him no, and I meant it with everything I have." Then Julia took the stand. Her testimony was a scalpel, precise, cutting through every falsehood Mark's team raised. She spoke of Emily's wishes, of Matthew's transformation, and of Mark's utter absence from the children's lives. And finally, Matthew's attorney produced the journal. The judge, a gray-haired woman with tired eyes but a sharp mind, read in silence for what felt like hours. Then she closed the cover. Her voice was firm. This court finds the claim of Mr. Carter not only unsubstantiated, but predatory in nature. Custody will remain with Mr. Walker. Mr. Carter is barred from any further contact with the children. This hearing is adjourned. Matthew let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Outside, the sun broke through the Portland clouds, warm and unexpected. He didn't win because he had money. He won because he showed up and stayed, just like Emily had hoped he would. The court ruling should have felt like a victory lap, but to Matthew, it was something else entirely. It felt like gravity. The responsibility was no longer theoretical. The kids weren't just visiting for a few days or sleeping over at his condo. This was it. He was their guardian, their protector, their dad. And with that came the next big step. "I bought a house," he told Julia one afternoon as they sat on the bench outside Sophie's ballet class. She blinked. "You what?" "A real house," he said. "Not a penthouse with concierge service and modern art. A craftsman, 2 stories, backyard, close to Irvington School. It even has a treehouse. Well, a very ambitious wooden platform." Julia smiled slowly, warmth blooming in her eyes. "That sounds, like home." "That's the idea." When he told the triplets, the reaction was seismic. "You mean, like we can decorate our rooms?" Liam asked. "With stickers?" Ben added, cautiously hopeful. "And paint?" Sophie pressed, raising an eyebrow like a seasoned negotiator. "Yes," Matthew chuckled. "All of that, within reason." On moving day, Sophie brought her feather jar, placing it carefully on a windowsill that faced east. Liam staked claim on the room with the biggest closet. "For my train models," he declared. Ben asked if they could build a small shelf in the bathroom, just for his dinosaur toothbrushes. Matthew had already bought them new beds. He left the rest blank. Walls untouched, shelves empty. He wanted them to fill it. That first night, they curled up together on the couch with popcorn and watched Finding Nemo. When the credits rolled, no one moved. Not because the movie was over, but because they didn't want the feeling to be. Later, as he tucked each of them in, Matthew felt a quiet comfort settle over him. No boardroom ever gave him that. But parenting wasn't just treehouses and story time. It was also homework meltdowns. tears over forgotten gym shoes, panic over missing library books. One night, Sophie cried silently for over an hour because she couldn't find a feather her mom gave her. Liam threw a small tantrum when the Wi-Fi lagged during his train simulation game. Ben, sweet, sensitive Ben, started sleepwalking. Matthew didn't always know what to do. But he stayed. He was there in the morning with waffles that were slightly burnt, and in the evening with Band-Aids and dad jokes that occasionally landed. "You're not bad at this," Liam mumbled one night while brushing his teeth. Matthew leaned against the doorframe, mock offended. "Wow, that was almost a compliment." "I mean it," Liam said, then added softly, "You don't quit." That sentence stayed with him. One evening, after the kids had fallen asleep in a tangled mess of blankets and flashlights, Julia found him on the porch holding a glass of ginger ale like it was whiskey. "Thinking about Emily?" she asked gently. He nodded. "I still talk to her sometimes, in my head. I tell her what the kids did, what I got wrong, what I hope I'm doing right." Julia sat beside him, her expression wistful. She would have loved this. You, them, the mess of it all. Matthew smiled quietly. I finally understand why she kept them from me. I wasn't ready, not back then. And now? I still don't know what I'm doing, but I know I'll be here, every time, even when I mess up." Julia looked out over the yard where the treehouse now held 3 flashlights and a crooked welcome sign. "Then you're doing it right." That night, Matthew found an email in his old archive, one he'd never seen, dated 2 years ago, from Emily. Subject, "In case you ever wondered, they're loud and wild and exhausting. They ask about dinosaurs and feathers and pancakes, but they're also kind and brilliant and brave, just like you could be if you ever gave yourself the chance." Matthew closed his laptop slowly. He didn't have to wonder anymore. He had the chance. And this time, he wasn't letting go. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Matthew finally understood the full weight of everything he had gained, and everything he almost missed. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and maple syrup. Sophie was drawing rainbows on the fogged-up window above the sink. Liam sat at the table, tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth as he assembled a Lego set with scientific precision. Ben was humming to himself, a stack of dinosaur books open like a fortress around him. Matthew stood in the doorway, coffee cooling in his hand, heart full and quiet. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, while folding laundry with Julia, an email pinged on his phone, an old Gmail account he hadn't touched in years. For some reason, he opened it. The subject line read, "If you ever find them." It was from Emily. The timestamp was from 6 years ago. It had been buried in an inbox he rarely checked, filed automatically under promotions, as if love could be sorted like a coupon. His breath caught. He read every word like it was oxygen. "They were never a mistake. If you ever meet them, be the man I saw in you once. Be their safe place." He read it twice, then 3 times, then sat down on the couch, stunned silent. Safe place. That phrase echoed through him. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present, constant, unshakable, the lighthouse in the storm. That night, he printed the email and tucked it inside his wallet, behind his driver's license, where he'd see it every day. Days turned into weeks. At parent-teacher conferences, he was just Mr. Walker now, no longer followed by curious whispers or judgmental stares. He packed lunches with corny notes. He attended spelling bees and dodgeball tournaments. He learned how to French braid hair from YouTube and discovered Sophie liked hers slightly loose on the left side. One chilly evening, he picked the kids up from school and surprised them with tickets to a traveling planetarium. Ben, eyes wide, whispered, "I want to be an astronaut." "You already are," Matthew replied. "You're brave. You're curious. You shoot for the stars every day." Ben beamed. At bedtime, Sophie lingered in the hallway. "Can I tell you something?" "Always," Matthew said, kneeling to her level. She hesitated, then whispered, "I think Mom would be really proud of you." His throat tightened instantly. He swallowed hard and nodded. "I hope so. Also," she added, serious-faced, "you should know, we had a vote. Liam said yes. I said yes. Ben said he wanted pancakes first, but then he said yes too." "A vote?" Matthew asked, confused. Sophie smiled shyly. "We voted that you're our forever dad now." He blinked fast, suddenly overwhelmed. "Thanks," he said, voice hoarse. "That means everything." She hugged him tight, arms wrapped around his neck. "We know." A week later, they visited Emily's grave. Each child carried a rose, red for Liam, white for Sophie, yellow for Ben. Matthew knelt between them, placing his own flower on the grass. He took a breath, then whispered, "We're okay. I hope you see us. I hope you know." The kids stood quietly, heads bowed. After a moment, Liam reached out, lacing his fingers through Matthew's. Ben did the same. Sophie rested her head on his shoulder. They didn't need to say anything. They were a family now. Not because of paperwork, not even because of blood. Because of love, earned, chosen, protected. Back at the house, Matthew helped Ben with spelling homework while Sophie braided Liam's hair just to annoy him. Laughter bubbled up. The sun set behind the treehouse, casting gold across the floor. Matthew looked out the window, then back at his kids. They didn't just find a father. And he didn't just find his children. They found home. They found each other. They found their safe place.